everyone. Welcome to the 12th SoCal Supply Chain Meetup event. Woo! We're super excited. If you haven't been to one of our events before, the SoCal Supply Chain Meetup was started to bring together the community of supply chain folks all around Southern California to talk about different challenges and events and regulations and opportunities going on in this SoCal supply chain market. And so today, we're really excited because we typically always talk about drayage being in the ports of LA and Long Beach, but we wanted to really dive into the relationship between the drayage trucking companies and the warehouses that they pick up and deliver from. So felt like this was a really cool topic to dive into, as it's such a critical little link within our supply chains, and just talk about the dynamic between the two, areas of improvement, some of the regulations that are happening within the warehouses, the warehouse space, and yeah, so excited to get started. Thanks so much to our sponsors, Braid Theory for this beautiful space, Port Pro, the Harbor Trucking Association, and Fourth Sector Innovations. I'm going to pass it off to Anne to do a quick intro, and then we'll get started.
So welcome everybody to our space at All to See. My name is Ann Carpenter. I'm CEO of Braid Theory. We run incubator and accelerator and entrepreneur serving programs in all areas of the blue economy, but sustainable supply chain is super near and dear to our hearts. We have a couple of our startup companies here today, and please enjoy.
Mics we got? Okay, 2 mics. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion on the vital relationship between drayage carriers and the warehouses they serve and deliver to. I'm Walker Banks, your moderator for tonight's session, and with me, as you now well know, is Tony Ann, one of our hosts this evening, who's done an excellent job, I must say, with the SoCal Supply Chain Meetup over now 2 years, right? More than 2 years. As Tony mentioned, we both represent Port Pro Technologies. We're a leading TMS provider in the drayage space, where I serve as Chief Operating Officer and Tony, our Chief Customer Officer, and she leads all of our commercial functions. We're thrilled, as always, to be part of this group, and as usual, of industry leaders and supply chain enthusiasts. Tonight, we're here to explore the challenges, opportunities, and dynamics that define the relationship between drayage carriers and warehouses. We'll delve into the characteristics and systems that shape a carrier's experience, examining what makes a warehouse easy or perhaps difficult to work with. Operational efficiency, communication protocols, software as a service, and infrastructure support will be key themes in our discussion tonight. Furthermore, we'll dive into the warehouse indirect source rule, the ISR rule, and the warehouse actions and investments to reduce emissions. That's the WARE program. We'll explore how these regulations impact both drayage trucking companies and warehouses, providing a comprehensive view of the regulatory landscape and its implications for our industry, more specifically here in Southern California. We're joined by an excellent panel of experts. I've got Jim Gillis. He is the President of the Pacific Region, IMC Logistics. He's here 2 seats down from me. We've got Ian McMillan, Assistant Deputy Executive Officer, South Coast Air Quality Management, that's AQMD. Dan Laughlin, he's Head of Commercials for Prologis Mobility at Prologis. And last but not least, and Stephanie, I apologize, you came late, so if I butcher your last name, I'm sorry. Stephanie Buick, Head of Business Development and Customer Success at Navtrack, which was recently acquired by LoadSmart. I prepared some questions to guide our conversation, but we'll also open the floor for audience questions towards the end. My goal is to foster a valuable discussion packed with strategic insights to help guide your supply chain strategies in the coming years. One last thing before we get started. In line with our guiding principle at Port Pro and the SoCal Supply Chain Meetup, we're here to foster solutions and exchange ideas, setting aside any notion of finger pointing. We aim to collaboratively address the issues facing our industry and identify opportunities for improvement and innovation. So without further ado, let's dive into what promises to be an engaging and insightful discussion. Questions for the panel. Jim, from your perspective at IMC, what are the top 3 characteristics that make a warehouse easy or perhaps difficult for drayage carriers to work with? Could you provide specific examples from your experience? And this question, I'm going to pass you the mic in just a second, really is going to set the framework for the remainder of the evening and how I sort of structure these questions for the rest of the group.
No pressure. Oh, yeah, jeez. All right. It's going to be good or bad with me. There's a whole bunch of characteristics I would think of, but the first would be how warehouses treat drivers. And I know that has nothing to do with software, but to me, that's probably the most critical element. It's amazing that we're in 2024. You can still send a driver to a warehouse, and they're treated like animals, right? And so you asked for examples. We used to do some business for a major automotive manufacturer. I won't say the name. Starts with a T. We would send drivers up, and we'd have arrive right on time for scheduled appointment times. They would not offer bathrooms for these drivers. They would sit out for 8 hours. And so they were shocked when I said, hey, man, I just don't want your business anymore. And so I think that's probably the number one, right, is how you treat drivers. Number 2 is flexibility, right? So we're in the major leagues of the port worlds in Southern California. Anybody in the drayage industry it can tell you that day to day, you don't know what's going to happen. You could go and have a great day in the port. The next day, you could say it's 4 to 5 hour turn times. And so when I look at warehouses and they tell me, hey, I'm only going to be open from 6 to 12. If you're 10 minutes late, you lose your appointment time. That's probably not a guy that I really want to do long-term business with because, there's a lot of factors outside the drayage company's control, whether you have traffic in LA or congestion in the port. I think flexibility is probably the biggest thing. And we operate our own warehouse, right? And so when I have outside carriers come to my warehouse, we treat them with respect. We got a good place for them to go use the restroom. They can have a cold Coke, get out of the heat. And we also know as long as they communicate with us, hey, we're going to be late, we're pretty easy to deal with. And I think number 3 gets into the technology side, right? So the old way, when I started on T-cards dispatching years and years ago, when you were scheduling an appointment at a warehouse, you're calling Rosie, leaving a message and going back and forth with Rosie. I like warehouses that are using these automated dock control, right? So I can log into a platform, I can select the appointment that I need, I can communicate with the warehouse. We use it at our own warehouse, and I think that that's the way of the future, and I wish more people would go to that. I also value warehouses that look at technology tools like electronic bill of ladings. I want my driver to walk in to a warehouse with a tablet, have them sign it just like you do with FedEx, be able to transmit that bill of lading immediately to the customer instead of doing hard pieces of paper that I got to take back to the warehouse or to my office, scan in, and it takes days for that customer to get it. And so and remarkably, there are warehouses today that don't want that, right? They want that old hard piece of paper. So we always look and push in our part of our sales process with these guys to say, hey, listen, technology's here. We got to improve it, improves transparency, and really gives a better result to our customer.
What percentage of those warehouses that you work with, do you think or would you estimate have electronic, what you just said, electronic bill of lading?
I would say less than 40%. Yeah, it's amazing, right? Even the ones that you think, oh man, this BCO, they're high speed. Nope, they operate the warehouse. They just sign this piece of paper, and and I know it's a small thing, but you're talking about sustainable trucking. Let's get rid of the paper. Let's get better service to our customer, a little bit better transparency. That's right. It's no cost to the customer, right? If I walk in with a tablet and he's signing my bill of lading, right? I think it's change management, fear of change, right? And these warehouses, you got a lot of people that have been working the same job for 10, 15 years, and they just don't see the bigger picture. And really, that's a problem of their leadership, right? They got to get involved and say, hey, how do we get more efficient and more streamlined with our supply chain partners?
Excellent answer, and certainly sets the tone for the remainder of what I've got here, so thank you, Jim. Ian, I'm going to go to you for this next one here. Can you explain the Warehouse Indirect Source Rule, ISR, and the WARE program for the audience? How do these regulations impact both drayage trucking companies and warehouses? And more specifically, what changes should we anticipate in the near future?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Thank you for having me. I'm going to start actually before I even answer. I'm going to turn a question. Who here has heard of the warehouse rule? Most everybody. Appreciate that. We still go to warehouses, knock on the door, and they say, what's an AQMD and what's a warehouse rule? So appreciate that everybody's heard about it. So let's dive in. Let's talk about regulations. That's why everybody came, right? It's everybody's favorite thing, 5 o'clock, regulations. Let's do it. So the warehouse rule, let me start off. South Coast AQMD, we'll start there. We're a government agency, right? We're the regional agency for Los Angeles, Orange County, Riverside County, San Bernardino County, everything south of the mountain, south of Cajon Pass. So there's a lot of warehouses in that space, right? We have a major regional smog problem here, worst in the country. It's been that terrible way for many decades, getting better, but a long ways to go. Our largest source of emissions is trucks. What do you do? So there's a lot of things that our agency looks to do, other agencies look to do to try to improve emissions. The warehouse rule is one of the pieces that came out of that. What the warehouse rule is, it's called a bunch of different things. There's the warehouse rule, Rule 2305, the WARE program, they're all the same thing. And what it is it's a new regulation, and it's new of its kind. There's no place currently anywhere that I'm aware of on Earth that's done it, though others are very interested. We're talking to a lot of other agencies throughout the nation giving us a call saying, hey, we're really interested. So this might be expanding. We'll see. But what it is, it requires warehouse owners and warehouse operators to take actions to reduce emissions from their operations. And the emissions from a regulatory context that we're concerned with are not just on site. Certainly that's a concern, but as the trucks go to and from that facility as well. This gets really challenging, of course, when you think about, well, most warehouse owners don't necessarily operate the warehouse. Most warehouse operators don't necessarily own a fleet and may not even directly contract with a fleet. Many do, right? One of the things that we really learned going through the development of this rule was there's a lot of business models out there. And so what we really tried to do to craft this rule was to make it flexible, to your point. We needed to try to put as many options out there as possible for compliance so that all these different business models could try to do something to reduce emissions, to facilitate emission reductions, allow different business models to thrive. And we've really seen this industry shifting just since we adopted the rule in 2021 and during rule development. We're seeing the industry shift just in technologies that are available. I mean, that's happening very, very quickly. And I think this rule is actually well positioned to take advantage of that. Let me give a little more detail what the rule itself does. It's a menu-based points system. So kind of like LEED, I think people have heard of LEED for building design. You've got a menu of actions. Every action has a certain number of points with it. Pick and choose off a menu, whatever you want to do, earn a certain number of points every year. That's the thing. Every year, people need to earn points, and it's mainly on the warehouse operator. So it's warehouse operators greater than 100,000 square feet. So big buildings, but there's about 3,000 of those in our jurisdiction. We're a pretty big agency. We're the largest air district in the nation. We have about 28,000 permitted facilities, and with one rule, we added 10% more. So it's a big challenge for us administering. One of the things we try to do is streamline everywhere we can. A lot of work still to do on that, but streamlining is a big piece of it. The kinds of things that are on the menu are things like, can you have a clean truck come to your facility? Clean trucks under the rule would be things like zero emission trucks or near zero emission natural gas trucks. Zero emission hostlers on site. Installing charging infrastructure, using charging infrastructure. Both of those separately earn you points. We allow incentive funds to be used. That we don't have any restrictions on that. Incentive programs themselves, maybe they do, but for the regulation, it's totally fine. So there's this annual compliance off of the menu. Alternatively, facilities can pay a mitigation fee to us. We found that a lot of facilities so far are paying a mitigation fee. It's the easiest thing to do, though not necessarily the cheapest. And so they can pay a mitigation fee. We're finding 30 to 40% pay a fee, but it's only 3% of compliance. So it's just a small little bit that's used on the mitigation fee. We're going to turn those funds right back around to incentivize zero emission trucks, charging infrastructure, fueling infrastructure for zero emissions around the warehouses that paid the fee. So we want to kind of return it right back to that source and make compliance easier in the future. The last thing that we did that I think will come up later in this conversation is we allowed a custom plan. We recognized we aren't going to be able to figure everything out on this menu. We've got like almost 3 dozen things on the menu, but people are going to figure out how to build a better mousetrap. And we're finding that people are. Like, business models are emerging, and there's ways to work it into the rule. If someone comes up with a better idea, hey, we'll figure out a way to get points under our rule and get that compliance. And we've approved our very first custom approach within the last year. And we'll hear more about that later on today. And we're hearing more interest on it. So allowing that technology to come along and have that flexibility to allow that in a regulatory context. More I can say on that, but I'll stop there. The rule is live. It was adopted by our governing board in 2021. The very first compliance year was 2022. It's phased in over a 5-year period, right? So we're sort of rolling it out over that 5 years, but then it will persist every year from here on out. Yeah, I'll repeat the question. So the question was, is this one building of 100,000 square feet, or what if there's 2 buildings next to each other that are 50,000 square feet? And there's a lot of different places. What if it's one building with 100,000 square feet with 2 tenants and 50,000, right? There's a lot of different ways to slice and dice. The way the rule is set up, there's a series of criteria on that applicability. It starts with a 100,000 square foot building, at least 50,000 square feet that a warehouse operator operates of warehousing activity. So we can also have a big building that does warehousing, but it's only a small piece of it, right? It might be a 1 million square foot building, but it's only 10,000 square feet of warehousing. There's minimal information we need. We need to know that that's what it is, but then they don't have to earn points. So we have some detailed criteria laid out. Great question. Indeed, we have. Yeah. So
you could ask the question again.
Yeah, for sure. So the question was, have we started enforcement or auditing? And yes, to both, we have. The enforcement, really, our very first part of rule implementation was outreach. Outreach, education. Again, we go and we knock on the door of some warehouses and they say, who are you? I don't know what you're talking about. What's this rule? We need to give people an opportunity to comply, right? That's the very first thing. So we start there, but we're now several years in. We've done lots of outreach, try to get the word out. Some people still might not have heard of us, but we're really beating the pavement to try to get the word out. So eventually, if people aren't complying, yes, we escalate it to the next stages. We have started issuing notices of violation, which is the ticket that we give. We're starting to resolve those. That's sort of initial stages, but we are going through that. We've gone through a couple waves of that so far, where we've issued about 200 notices of violation. Mainly, we're just trying to get people in the system right now, get them used to the program. So that has started. Auditing has started. That's kind of initial stages. But yes, we have started auditing as well. My colleague, Vicki White, her team does a lot of that work. She's sitting in the back. So we are doing a lot of that work and a lot more of that to come.
Is it true that there's been one bill of 7 figures, I heard, for one warehouse in particular, or one entity, business entity? I can't name the name, but I've heard the name.
Are you talking about as part of a settlement of a notice of violation, or are you talking about some other compliance component? So the rule itself, the amount of points that a facility needs to earn is based on their truck traffic. It's not based on their size. So if they are a very, very busy operation, their obligation is higher. It is possible that you could have very high compliance costs, but think about the scale of that operation, right? As a significant scale of that operation. So there could be significant costs with this rule, absolutely. At the end of the day, how we look at it, as a government agency, what's the trade-off? And the trade-off is public health. right? And what we see is that compliance with the rule, that trade-off, the public health, there's significant costs, there's a 3-to-1 benefit on public health. So, and in addition to any sort of, issues we have to deal with EPA and meeting air quality standards. Yes.
Good context, great answers. Thank you to the audience for largely doing my job for me. I do appreciate that. I'm going to share some airtime here and pass the question over to Dan. And now that I know you're a software guy, I'm particularly interested in the answer to this question. So, Dan, given your role at Prologis, what innovative solutions, software as a service or otherwise, are being implemented to enhance operational efficiency and infrastructure support, probably more importantly, for warehouses? How do these benefits help drayage carriers more specifically?
Great question. So, can you hear me? Is this on? So real quick, Dan Laughlin, I'm with Prologis on the mobility side. So we're doing the EV charging infrastructure, both behind the fence at our warehouses, at third-party warehouses, and we're building standalone charging hubs as well. Look, I'm heritage a software guy. I'm on the infrastructure side. Now, I'm not a real estate person. And so my perspective generally is that the technologies we're using now have been generally available. I mean, yeah, EV trucks are pretty compelling, and I think the charging infrastructure and the software is pretty compelling, but I feel like a lot of these capabilities aren't that new. My perspective is what's really innovative is how operators are morphing business models to take advantage of some of the capabilities, leveraging, the technology. So I'll give you an example. We're building behind the fence charging infrastructure for a company like Performance Team Maersk. And we leverage the software platform that runs those charging islands to not only allow Maersk trucks to charge, but Maersk can bring in third-party vehicles from Amazon or JB Hunt or others who need to pick up a charge and are co-located in that neighborhood, or have an agreement with Maersk where maybe they're doing a job for Maersk and they wrap that into the commercial arrangement. So we're allowing the infrastructure to be leveraged in ways that I think without the software you couldn't really do. But I think that software capability is not super unique or cutting edge. It's just we're leveraging it in the business model. So we have a deal with Maersk that allows them to bring those third parties in. We've worked out the billing arrangement on how we handle that. And then if we're working with Amazon separately, we can even wrap the Amazon charge at the Maersk site into the Amazon contract we have with them at other sites. So I think that's, I think that you would all look at it and say, well, duh, you should be doing that. But I think, the hard part is in the detail and how do you actually get the contracting done. And so the innovation is really more around making sure that the business model and the contracts and the way the billing works actually support what looks like it should be achievable at the high level, but often fails when you get into the grid.
So you'd say it's less a problem about availability and similar to what Jim was saying, maybe more change management.
I think so. My sense is that, having been in software for a long time, we've had these capabilities for a really long time. We just don't always use them to the effect that we could.
We feel the same way. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gordy.
You're not really allowing other companies to charge at your infrastructure. It's required if you took the HVIP funding. So it's a requirement to give public access to your charging station if you took the HVIP money.
So remember, we're not taking the HVIP money. We're the landlord, and we don't own the trucks. So our tenants own the trucks. Our tenants have taken the HVIP money. And so that infrastructure that we build behind the fence is really there for the benefit of the tenant, but they can make the decision of, hey, we want to sweat this asset harder, and our business model with them incents them to sweat that asset harder so everybody wins. But ultimately, it's their decision about whether they want to have third parties come onto that site or not. Now, separately, we are building charging hubs that are publicly available, and in that case, yes, that's a come one, come all. Well, we can do different commercial deals with the different off-takers that are rolling onto that site. But when it's a behind-the-fence site, it's really a tenant-dictated, the tenant controls who they want to charge, how they want to charge, and we build the infrastructure basically to their spec. You buying it or you're not buying it?
Like you said, you're the software guy, not the real estate guy.
Well, right. I think, look, as the landlord, the benefit that we have is we can build this infrastructure. You know, we're not building speculative behind the fence charging infrastructure, so we'll work. It's almost always tenant-led. The tenant will say, look, we've got, whether it's Class 8 trucks or last mile trucks, we will work with the tenant to design a charging infrastructure solution that works for their operations. But the benefit of being the landlord is you can not only build to that spec, you can take a 30-year view and say, well, you know, gosh, if there's some economy of scale we can pick up by, you know, maybe we don't want to put all charging pedestals in, but we can lay the conduit. If we're going to do a trench, let's run the trench for the entire length of the lot. So there are things we're doing to kind of skate where the puck is going to be, as opposed to just answering the immediate request from the tenant. And I think that's my sense is that Prologis is, as a landlord, is a little bit more in the vanguard in that. I think there are a lot of landlords that haven't quite kind of embraced that idea of how can we work with our tenants and be creating infrastructure that's more future-proofed. But I think Prologis is really leaning into that.
I like the notion of future-proof. I'm going to keep letting the audience ask some questions, so go ahead.
That's a great question. So I think the question was, how are we thinking about efficiency and what federal, state, local incentive programs, other programs can we leverage to build out that? So I'm going to dodge the question just marginally because when you talk about LED versus HVAC versus elements to efficiency, I'm not going to know all the answers to that. What I will say is that we are the second largest owner of rooftop solar in the country. And we have a systemic approach to thinking about how we can not only help our tenants, but how we can get to net zero ourselves. We have a very public and aggressive net zero expectation, and so it's not so from a carbon perspective, all the Scope 3 emissions that we're incurring through our tenants, we need to have a plan to how to mitigate that. And so yes, solar is an important part of that. But so are, sort of lighting programs, HVAC, and one of the things that we've done is that rather than looking at the triple net lease as kind of the sacrosanct way we're going to contract with our tenants, we're moving more to a model where we're taking over the meter, and that allows us to offer things like, LED lighting or HVAC or any of those efficiency programs that historically were really hard to implement because you had the tenant-landlord disconnect on the triple net lease structure where the tenant got the benefit through the utility bill, but the landlord had to foot the capital. With the landlord owning the meter, we can not only justify the investment in that infrastructure to put the efficiency gear in, but we can underwrite that over that 30-year period. So the actual cost to the tenant that's got a 5-year lease or a 7-year lease, they're not having to bear the totality of that cost. So I think that's been it kind of sounds like a no-brainer, but I think we're one of the landlords, I think, that are leading in that respect.
I'd love to bring you some contribution margin to your plans. I'd love to speak to that.
Awesome. Let's talk about it.
All right, thank you, Dan. I promise I'm going to bring all of these, what appear to be disparate questions, together back at the end and sort of pivot a little because we've had a couple of good questions from the audience that cover some of the subjects that I wanted to ask the panelists up here. But I'm going to go to Stephanie now. Again, slightly what may appear as an off-topic question, but I think relevant for what we're talking about. Stephanie, from your experience with NavTrack and now LoadSmart, what communication protocols have you found to be most effective between warehouses and carriers? Could you share a case or two where improved communication significantly impacted your operations or perhaps some of your partners?
Yeah, great question. So one of the products that NavTrack offers is a QR-based driver check-in tool, and we created that during COVID because of all of the safety protocols that were in place. And the way that this product works is a driver, they're able to get a QR code ahead of time. They can preload all their information, upload their BOL, their driver's license, et cetera. They come into the facility, they check in, they get a text message saying, you checked in successfully. All that information is then pushed into the warehouse, so they're able to see instantaneously when a driver arrives. They can receive all of their paperwork, and those facilities are then able to faster stage product. They can load and unload drivers quicker. We also have a SMS texting feature where the facilities are able to talk to the driver directly, again, because of COVID safety protocols, and that actually remove the need to have a driver interact with those in the office. That also cut down on the wait times for drivers, and it just made our facilities more efficient. We actually have a facility who told us that improved check-in time and that improved time in staging and preparing for drivers load or unload. They were actually able to increase their throughput each day by 30%. And on the other side of that, we also have a lot of drivers who have given great feedback about this tool. So one of the kind of historical he said, she said is, what time a driver arrived, what time did they leave, did they actually have detention, is the facility fudging those numbers? And it's funny, if you Yelp some of our facilities, drivers have actually submitted Yelp reviews saying that they like this product because they feel like they have that autonomy and that transparency to be able to see when they arrived, when they departed. So if they do have detention, they have these time-stamped text messages and direct messages from the facility, and they're actually able to better fight for the detention claims that they are owed. So not only is it improving the efficiency with the warehouses, but in a way that we didn't expect, the drivers are loving it, and they're feeling like they have a lot more autonomy in their job.
Questions for Stephanie from the audience? Okay. I'm going to combine a couple of different questions here, and this is going to be for all panelists. Jim, I'll start with you. We'll go back to Stephanie, and then we'll finish off from there. Looking ahead, and this is going to be a very open-ended question, by the way, so feel free to give quite a bit of detail. Looking ahead, what are major trends that you foresee in the drayage carrier and warehousing sector that hasn't already been discussed tonight? How should both carriers and warehouses prepare to stay competitive and, probably most importantly tonight, compliant in the evolving regulatory and technological landscape? Jim, you and I caught up on IMC's technology stack, so feel free to start there in terms of how you guys are calculating CO2 emissions, why this may be relevant for ocean carriers. Really feel free to answer that question in a myriad of different ways.
Okay. All right. Two answers here. One, I'm going to do Stephanie a solid and sell her NavTrack product. So I've got NavTrack deployed in 4 facilities, and so I kind of tie that into ISR Ware, right? Because her NavTrack product, and there's a host of these guys that are doing this, OCR technology, reading the truck and the container data coming in, and also helping you do compliance with Ware, understanding what year that truck is, right? And so I think that technology is going to take a boom over the next 2 years as ISR and Ware, kind of tightens down, and big fan of the product. So I think that's number one. And then I think number two, CO2 emissions calculations, right? So not a lot of people are talking about it. The BCOs, especially the European-based guys, they're looking for it. They want to know, they're looking at their Scope 2, their Scope 3 emissions, and they want to know how much are you saving us, right? And so I think that the TMS providers of the world, I think that's the next big challenge, is how do you calculate on a leg-by-leg basis the amount of CO2 or greenhouse gas emissions that we're being able to save by using zero emissions or renewable diesel or near zero, right? So I think that's the next big challenge. And we're doing it, right? I don't think it's a perfect calculation, but I think that folks like PortPro eventually going to be able to figure that out, and that transparency in data is pretty valuable.
Right on. Thank you. Stephanie, I'll pass the mic to you.
Okay, so from a different viewpoint, what NavTrack is seeing is that across all industries post-COVID, we're seeing a labor shortage. And a lot of the feedback that we're getting from our customers is that it's hard to not only find security or guards that are reliable, but to find those that are going to show up, that are going to actually have an interest in doing their job effectively because they don't have a connection to that facility. A lot of times it's a third party that they're hiring through. And so with the products that NavTrack offers, we're actually able to autonomize all of that and digitize all of the data that's coming through. So as a truck passes through, our cameras are able to capture that. They're able to digitize all those alphanumerics. And so a lot of our customers are actually able to either cut back on the need for guards or actually completely remove the need for a guard. And that's obviously there's that ROI of that full-time employee, but there's also the headache of, you're removing that headache of having to worry about those guards. In addition, that data is also clean. We did a case study that manual data entry has about a 9% error rate, and NavTrack operates at I think we're at 98.7 or something along the lines of that. And having that clean data, our customers have also been able to report back to us just how much of a difference that makes. And so what we are seeing is not only with a solution like what NavTrack offers, but there's so many solutions out there that are digitizing that data and cutting out that need for that manual entry, which I feel like post-COVID, our industry was very manual, as I think maybe Jim had mentioned earlier. It was a lot of these facilities that you would think, these big names, they would have this technology behind them, and they're still using pen and paper, MS-DOS. And so I see that there's been a big change in moving towards these automated systems.
Yeah, fabulous. Dan?
Repeat the question.
I can't. Yeah, I was going to say, I can repeat the question if you like. So, looking ahead, what are the major trends you foresee in the drayage and warehousing sector? How should both carriers and warehouses prepare to stay competitive and, again, most importantly, compliant in an evolving regulatory and technological landscape? And again, you'll have a very unique perspective as the landlord.
Right. I think the mobility angle in particular will narrow my response a bit. But I think, so I'm new to drayage. I'm an energy guy by heritage. What's really been very visceral to me over the last couple of years is the volatility of that you folks deal with in your market, and particularly in this market, how crazy it's been. So that's really driven home the idea that flexibility is a business imperative. Our business model has got to be flexible for our customers. And so I think this idea of building a flexible charging network, for example, where we've got some publicly available hub charging. We will also do, behind the fence, dedicated charging for the tenants, but then creating the ability to flip between those sites and to flex over a period of time, both from a utilization commitment and where you're charging. That flexibility, I think, is really kind of our North Star right now. So that's been I think 2 years ago, we were building a bunch of points, and now we're building a network that flexes. So that's been an innovation that I think we're seeing the market demand, and we want to rise to meet the market. I think, on the, and I think one of the things we're implementing for a tenant right now is the idea that we built a few projects for them, and we contracted each one of them individually, and then they had to drop one of those sites, and it stranded that asset, and they said, can't we do this as a portfolio where we can flex new, old sites and mush utilization around to meet our commitments? So you're kept whole, but we want flexibility. So those are some of the business model innovations that we're trying to drive towards that I think are really important for the market.
Yeah, is it fair to say that you're working very closely with your tenants on some of these new regulations coming down the pipeline and are actively involved in helping them adopt, innovate, change?
Absolutely, and Ian, you may want to talk about how, from an ISR perspective, how you're thinking about off-prem charging, and I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth there, but I think, this idea that, yes, there are truck trips, but if they're charging they're charging off-prem, but in service of a truck trip that's coming on-prem, I think you guys are doing some work in that respect as well, aren't you?
Great, thanks, appreciate that. So yes, in fact, I think that's one of the things we talked about with this custom approach, that we're open to things happening off-site from a warehouse for compliance with our warehouse rule. We just need to make sure that there's a nexus to the warehouse, right? You know, our rule isn't going to cover all zero emission activities in the region. Our rule is designed to, you know, address emissions associated with warehouses. But to get to the point about, you know, some of these tracking software that's now, you know, really coming into its own. And I want to just check. So you said you were a fan of Stephanie's product, or you're a fan of ISR. I heard you say you're a fan of ISR, but.
Stephanie's product.
Oh. All right, just checking. But no, to the point that there is a lot of tracking software that's available now. You know, when we were developing the rule, that was actually, I mean, it's a really minor thing. I mean, you can imagine, we're a government agency. We get pushed in a bunch of different directions. And one of the things that we're often pushed is, you know, be very prescriptive on something. And from industry, we hear that, you know, very clear rules of the road. From environmental groups, we hear that. You need to be really draconian on something. And, you know, there's a lot of focus on emission reduction things. But one of the most difficult parts of the rulemaking was, how do you track truck trips? It's not so simple, right? As I think everybody knows, but like, you go to a warehouse and, you know, if they have their own fleet, that's a little easier. But how about all the third-party trucks coming in? And what do you actually do? And sometimes it's a guy at a gate who's actually writing it all down, pen and paper, and then there's apps and cameras. And so we do allow in the rule a lot of different ways to track truck trips. And that's really critical because that determines the compliance obligation. So we want to allow sort of that flexibility for different ways to do it. And I think all these apps that are coming out and all these different pieces of software that are coming out are really helpful, especially as we go through auditing, you know, to be able to say, okay, here's all the records for all these truck trips. And to the point that what we're seeing of, you know, new models emerging for, you know, charging hubs for trucks or truck as a service and all that kind of thing, that how do we track that offsite activity is actually associated with the warehouse. All of these different platforms that are out there allow that to happen much smoother, and it helps compliance with the rule, definitely.
Very helpful answer. Would anyone else like to weigh in with any additional thoughts before I pass it over to the audience for questions? Okay.
Absolutely. All right, so ISR 2.0. There's probably 3.0 and 4.0 and 5.0, so let me just give the broad spectrum of it that's out there. Maybe that would be helpful. So we are working on additional rules. CARB also has their rules. They have Advanced Clean Fleets, which everybody knows and loves. I joke, we're having fun, right? ACF, but it's another regulation that's out there. And we are bringing a rule to our governing board first Friday in August on rail yards. It looks very different than our warehouse rule, and it's because just the business models are completely different at a rail yard than they are at a warehouse. And so the rule is structured for the regulatory setting, the legal setting, the business setting, and all that for rail yards, but we are bringing a rule there. The idea, though, that you can have compliance, you know, activity to, you know, say if you have, as an example, a zero-emission truck going from a warehouse to a rail yard, well, you get credit on both ends. So it sort of feeds on itself, and it helps that system get cleaner equipment out there. We're working on something with ports. That's about all I'm going to say on that. We're working on something with ports. A lot of work, but I'm just going to leave it there. So there's additional effort happening there. But these regulations, they're evolving, right? They clearly are, and I think the reason that we're so focused on it, I can understand there's a lot of concern from industry about this, but it's half of our emissions profile is goods and movement. We have the worst air in the nation, so we have to comprehensively go at this. And it's really, really a challenge. We can understand for industry, but we need to address the emissions. The one thing I will mention that I don't think is really on anybody's radar, but we're starting to think about it just now internally for the warehouse rule. One of the things that we have is a callback 5 years into the rule to look at the technologies that are out there now. And do we update our menu? And we aren't really sure yet what's going to come of that. You know, there's a lot of different things I think we're talking about here. There's other things that might be on the table that, you know, we would look at all these technologies and recommend to our board, hey, should we make an amendment and, you know, make some changes to that rule. So we aren't there yet. That's 2026 timeframe that we'll be looking at that, but it's around the corner.
Cool. All right, I'll go to the audience now for questions. Yes, sir.
I could project, but it's probably easier to hear this way. This one's for you, Jim. For those warehouse operators that you are bringing a ware credit to by running zero emissions truck trips through them, how are y'all handling that value that you're delivering, and how are you being compensated for that value?
No, that's the secret sauce. There's not many zero emissions registered trucks in the Port of LA and Long Beach right now. I think the last count I had was about 220-ish, right? And so, just like any business, when you're buying a truck that's high value asset, Gordy and I were talking earlier, the difficulty of having these assets, financing, it's difficult. The insurance is very difficult. Training is difficult. And so you've got an asset that, and frankly, the technology is pretty new, right? And so you've got a lot of failure rate. And so I think it's rightful to charge a zero emissions, some type of fee to help offset that, especially when the warehouse operator is getting a pretty large credit. Who knows what that fee is, right? But I do think that's a fair thing, and I think long term that's going to be commoditized, right? So as when we get 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 trucks in the registry that are zero emissions trucks, that fee will go away. But I do think that today that's the should be the path forward for the drayage industry.
Thank you.
There was another question in the back. I'm not sure who had their hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if any of your facilities are experiencing any spikes, sags, inductive loads, and are you guys remediating any of that, mitigating and increasing the efficiency of your facilities and for your clients? And are you guys making money off of the current solar or energy mitigation efforts in order to align for the COP27 mandate of 2030 and beyond?
To dumb it down, are you asking about brownouts?
Yeah, anything like that.
Okay. No, I mean, I
surges.
haven't really experienced any. I've got chargers at my facilities. I mean, they're probably not to the scope of Prologis, but we haven't had any problems so far. I would tell you that I have heard some horror stories from other operators with smaller amounts of chargers that have had problems with the energy providers, but I haven't experienced any.
And looking at Metrolink, do you guys have any vertical carbon that you guys are also reducing or mitigating in any way and making money off of that into the market? Because the carbon credit market is elapsing tremendously. And our issuing authorities, like the California Pollution Controlling Financing Authority that is issuing these credits, is looking for big industrial manufacturing facilities to take advantage of this. And just wondering if, aside from solar, are you guys creating any more efficient power throughout your facility and for your clients, for their machinery to be long-lasting and dismiss any errors that they may have?
Honestly, that's yeah. We don't see that much. I mean, I think generally when you think about warehouses, the load in these sites is pretty small, right? I mean, like relatively speaking, on a square foot basis, the electrical load is really small. The challenge that we typically run into is that any kind of Class 8, any kind of incremental addition of Class 8 vehicles almost always requires a new service, because if you've got I don't know, Kim, if you've got a 250,000 square foot building, that building might only have 500 kW, right? And all of a sudden you've got, you need two megawatts of new power, and so all of a sudden you've got to go to DWP or SCE for a new service. In which case your charging is great, but now you've got the challenge of now you got to go through the utility and get the new service, so that's a 9 to 12 month process, and depending on what funding you're leveraging to support that investment, you may have not so much restrictions, but there may be nuances to how what you can do with that new service. So I think what we're trying to incent our customers to do is to think about what can you do on house power, how can you leverage solar and storage to expand the envelope of house power to support initial charging rollouts, and then If you want to supersize the trucks that are electric and you really need more, then pivot to a new service, but do everything you can to maximize the on-prem power. And it's a bit of a trick, and I think solar is really important. And bluntly, the California solar rules don't always make it easy to do that, right? So we're working through that. But we had a meeting with the CEO of PG&E a couple of weeks ago, and I think there are ways that we can work better with utilities. I think one of the obvious misses is that often when we ask for a new service, we max the ask, and we may not really, we want 2 megawatts, but the conversation never happens about, well, you want 2, but hey, could you live with, a half a megawatt for the next 6 months, and then a megawatt for the year after that, and then 2 megawatts in 3 years. There's never that nuanced discussion, and I think the utilities and the infrastructure providers like ourselves would really benefit from having a better, more dynamic conversation about how you dial that, so we're not overbuilding and having idle capacity. That doesn't help anybody, right?
I wanted to put aside like the ISR sustainability conversation for a second and really, oh my God, sorry, that wasn't a fall on you. I want to just talk really about like the dynamic between the drayage carrier and the warehouse. I don't know if this is a question for Jim. Whoa. And I understand like flexibility in the way that the warehouses treat the drivers. Those are all like really valid areas of improvement. But the overall efficiency of the way a drayage trucking company works with warehouses, maybe it's from like a technology perspective, but like communicating with them, letting know that they're coming, like all that whole, from the moment a trucking company knows they're going to a warehouse, the moment they get there, the moment they leave, like that whole process, like how could that be made if it's like the best case scenario, just like 100% more efficient? Is it like the systems, the TMS and the warehouse management system integrated and communicating with each other? How do you foresee like that process being streamlined?
Well, I think it's a deeper conversation.
Yeah.
To me, it's more about the broken appointment system we have in the Ports LA and Long Beach, right? So, I'm from Texas, and I was always taught A to B dispatch, right? You pick up a box, you go to a customer, you turn around, you take that box right back. When I moved to LA, that's just not how it is. Every dispatch has 4 legs, right? You pick up a box, you take it to your yard, because you might get an appointment at 2 o'clock in the morning, and your customer doesn't want it till 7 o'clock the next morning. And then when you empty that box out, you have to bring it to your yard because you have to facilitate an empty appointment time. And so I think that really, if you really want to talk about efficiency, that has to be fixed, right? And so I know that there's a lot of, and that's off topic, and I apologize, but I know there's a lot of federal money going towards fixing that problem, but to me, it's not being fixed, right? You have 2 distinctly different systems that they're developing, one in the port, the ports of LA and one in the port of Long Beach, and it's not going to solve our problem, right? So I think solving that, number one. And I think, electronic communications with warehouses, I think that's the key, right? If I can communicate electronically to a warehouse, I can cut out phone traffic and transmit data so that warehouse knows what's coming when it's coming, and I know when it's received electronically. I think that that's kind of the key to smoothing out the processes and cutting out a lot of the manual back and forth, which seems to be, the rule of our business.
Like what TMS do you use and what WMS?
We use our own. We built,
proprietary?
30,
Okay.
40 years ago, and
Gotcha.
probably not as nice as yours, but it's pretty good. And so we have 100 programmers working on it, and I think that our business is so dynamic that you've got to continually change, these TMSs. Our WMS is off the shelf. We're not really, we're a drayage operator.
That's
right?
what I was going to ask, like if they speak to each other.
They do not speak to each other, right?
Interesting.
And I haven't really run across any TMS, WMS combination that does that, right? And that's kind of the dream world, that if you could find somebody that has that complete package where you could track a container from the port all the way through a warehouse where you're busting.
That answers my question.
Busting it up into multiple parcels and sending out to customers, to me, that's the golden ticket, right? If you can fix that program, I'll buy it, so.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that because as Jim mentioned, his company does use NavTrack, and we've actually been working with some of his teams recently to configure actually our API integration so that his team can use our data in a better, more streamlined approach. And a lot of what we see when we talk with customers is they do want that one-stop shop that's going to give you everything you need. And unfortunately, that doesn't exist. And so a lot of, I think what we're seeing with customers we're talking with or our existing customers is finding ways that we can have these systems talk to each other using API integrations, using different types of reporting that's going to provide the information you need to take out all of those manual steps that we're seeing within our industry. So API integration has been a huge push at our company with other companies we work with. The proprietary systems are a little bit harder to communicate with, but we are making it work, and so we're always trying to find for our customers just ways to make that system more automated and less manual, and that the API integration has been a huge conversation for us.
Any other questions from the audience? All right. I'll just take this opportunity then just to piggyback off that, Stephanie, because well, I normally wouldn't do this as a panel moderator since we're talking APIs and TMS solutions and warehouse management solutions. That's a big reason why PortPro has been able to realize some of the success in the marketplace that it has, is because we've been very clear with our partners, with our customers, and pretty much everyone else in the industry. We are open source. You can connect with us via API. We want warehouse management systems to come in and connect and be made available, make data available, like when a driver is en route or he's 30 minutes away or his appointment at 8 p.m. is in 3 hours from now, and this is the freight that he's got on board, here's the container number, if there's any holds. All of that information we make readily available to any one of our partners that's interested in getting their hands on that data. And the more warehouse management systems we can talk to, yard management systems we can talk to, even in some cases proprietary transportation management solutions like what Joel Tracy and the IMC group have built, we definitely want that. That just benefits the industry from end to end and makes everyone's life easier. So if there's no other questions, I'll sort of conclude since we're just over an hour now. Really appreciate all the panelists up here. Thank you all very much. Wonderful conversation, and thank you to the audience for helping me out. I did appreciate that. That was not sarcasm.
Yeah, thank you.